we need to talk about Jolteon today. As you all know, I am an incredibly strong advocate for Jolteon in Generation 9, going basically entirely the opposite direction of how I've normally been viewing Jolteon. And, I mean, if you know the new changes in Gen 9, obviously you're not going to be shocked by that. But I think it's important to talk about why Jolteon is just so good, despite how its move pool is still really limited. Like, just a quick gander at all the sets that we're showcasing today. I mean, y'all are seeing the same, like, 5 moves all in all, right? But each set, despite how similar they may seem to the last, has a couple very useful distinctions that I do want to bring up and talk about why these variants of Jolteon exist. If you have been enjoying this content as of late, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, so that we can hit our end of year goal of 10,000 new subscribers. And hey, join as a member if you can. Help support me and you get more content, which I think is a pretty good deal. So, we're talking about Jolteon. Obviously, there are a few reasons to why Jolteon got really good in the first place. If you all remember, a certain other electric type had been dominating NU for the first, I don't know, say like 4 months. And that was Rotom. And why was Rotom so good? Couple reasons. The biggest would be that nasty plot Rotom was just so diabolical. Rotom was already really good at forcing out opposing Pokemon. In specific, you'd be looking at Sandaconda. That's why Rotom's usage rose in the first place, alongside Electros's. And with Tera Fairy, even forcing out something like Electros became a little bit more possible, because maybe you turn into a Fairy type and a nasty plot up, and then your opponent's like, oh shit, I don't want to lose my Electros this early. So then they'll switch out, and you just start getting a lot of leverage. And of course, too, you also walled Chansey, which is a pretty huge thing. And in addition to this, though, Rotom was an incredible Scarfer, and since the meta was a little bit slower, you could often afford to just trick your Scarf off at any point in the game to cripple something like, again, we're talking about an Electros on the opponent's team, maybe a Dunsparce, a Chansey, maybe a Lurantis coming in on you, literally anything that was bulky, you could dump your Scarf onto, make them really ineffective, and it wasn't just punishing because, okay, Rotom without its Scarf is probably still going to be faster than half of your opponent's team, if not more. But now the metagame's a lot faster. We have Pokemon like Scyther at the very top of the meta, new Pokemon like Hisumi and Sneasel that have come into the fray. And as a result of that, Jolteon has taken over as the predominant electric-type pivot because of how fast it is naturally. And keyword there is naturally. Jolteon doesn't have to hold a Choice Scarf to be fast. It is just 394 naturally. So, unless you are faster than base 70 speed with a Choice Scarf, you're gonna be slower than Jolteon. It's the fact of life. This mod outruns the entire unboosted metagame bar, you know, Electrode, which is not used at all in NU right now. And so, that's huge because you get to have these Calm Mind sets that are so effective. Jolteon as well is just able to dictate games on its own because of how good Terastallization is on it. Tera Blast Ice, nuking Sandaconda, obliterating things like Appleton and Cacturn and Lurantis, and even flying types maybe that try to go for Terra Ground. That just isn't safe because, okay, I might just predict you to go for your own Terra and say, okay, I'm not even going to risk you doing that. I'm going to hit you with this Ice move, and you're gonzos. You're done. So all those reasons have combined to make Jolteon so effective. And in the eyes of many people, broken. I ran a room poll in NU, and a room poll, you know, it's one thing compared to a suspect test, right? But, you know, I had a couple Pokemon up there with, like, Dunsparce, Mesprit, Oricorio, and Jolteon. And Jolteon was actually the most voted option for what people wanted to see get suspect tested. So, when we're talking about the specific sets, of course, this is what everyone sees in their games, primarily. And it's no surprise why. Tera Blast Ice is hidden power from Generation 5, except it is twice as strong. And when you turn to an Ice type, you don't lose Stab on Thunderbolt, so there's not even any drawback there. So this set basically just makes Jolteon better than it was back then, although of course it's so far down in the tiers due to overall power creep. But imagine transferring Gen 5 Jolteon into NU, and I feel like that kind of gets the point across, right? talk about Jolteon that was at a higher power level, now we're just deciding it's in you. It's kind of how it's gone. And of course, counterplay to this ends up being very limited because Sandaconda doesn't want to have to Volt Block because you're almost guaranteed to be one-shot from full. By unboosted just raw Tera Blast Ice. Like, that is disgusting. And then any grass type, disregarding the whole idea of you potentially get smashed by Tera Blast Ice, you're just Volt Switch momentum fodder. Jolteon doesn't have to predict you immediately and go for its Terastallization. It can Volt Switch pivot, just keep bringing in partners like, say, a Toxicroak, Hisuian Sneasel, or Ikorio, Pyroar, etc. And of course, that particularly applies to Pokemon that Jolteon can't really muscle past too easily otherwise. You talk about your Blissies of the world, Ursaring, Coiled to Dunsparce, these very, very specially bulky normal types that you're gonna struggle with just because they are so, tanky. Jolteon can't Tera past them, so I just Volt Switch on you, I get my spikes up potentially, and make you take chip damage the whole game, and then I clean up with Jolteon once you're in range of a +1 Thunderbolt. So that's a standard Jolteon, and now we're going to talk about like some variations in Calm Mind, that I think are worth talking about. This one in particular, Tera Ghost Jolteon is pretty big for just beating up on Blissey. Now, Blissey does often run Shadow Ball, and so if you run into a Shadow Ball Blissey, it can be a little dire. I do think it's worth reiterating, though. Blissey's kind of weak, even with its more serviceable special attack stat that enables it to run Calm Mind. If Jolteon's able to get a couple boosts, like as Blissey comes in, it's not the best. Now, you have to boost to +6 to two-shot a Blissey. However, maybe you're able to get Blissey to be so low before it's able to come in that it has to soft-boiled. If you're able to start getting some boosts, it could be pretty good. You don't have to Tera immediately. You can wait and try and force it to S-Toss you, and then get that Tera off. I'd probably still, make sure you Tera on the first S-Toss, but that's the whole point. You deny its best way of doing damage to you. And Calm Mind Blissey, although of course that's a huge problem, I will bring up this interesting point that if you get a high enough crit on the first Thunderbolt from Jolteon when you're both at +6, you can technically still two-shot Blissey. A crit does like 75 to 90, and then unboosted it's like 10 to 15 or something, which is pretty bad, but again, just crit smile. And a Tera Ghost is also pretty useful because you want to look at revenge killers to Jolteon. Its physical attackers are really the only ones you're worried about. Something like a Scarf Rotom, which the next set we're going to talk about, very, very funny guy. But that is going to always struggle to revenge kill Jolteon because you're getting special defense boosts. Shadow Ball ain't two-shotting. And this set, it applies to Tera Ice Jolteon too, but this set you even have Shadow Ball. So you can just smack it in the face. Very, very consistently. But to go back to what Tera Ghost does, think about the revenge killers, again, like we said. Physical ones, so maybe Scarf, Hisuian Sneasel? Yeah, that doesn't revenge kill you as consistently if you can Tera on the CC, or even on the Gunk Shot. So, that's part of the reason Jolteon gets to be so hard to deal with. A lot of our Scarfers are special attackers, unless you talk about like Bruxish or Hisuian Sneasel, which, as good as they are, they're not on every team. Now, so... this set's a very funny guy. The reason that this set gets the usage it does, with Silk Scarf, and how Hyper Voice is just better than Tera Blast and Shadow Ball, discounting, of course, if you Terastallize, you have a bit more spammable of a move to hit grass types, maybe, that are switching, or even Sandaconda. You don't have to dedicate to your Tera either. You've got just a nice way of hitting them hard without dedicating to your mechanic. Because sometimes you do need to save Tera. Jolteon does kind of have a reputation for being Tera-reliant, and this set kind of works to reduce that. But a very unique thing that it does, otherwise, is with Tera normal, you actually wall Choice Scarf Rotom if you decide to Tera, which is pretty cool. Not like you were too worried about it anyway, like we mentioned just a few seconds ago. You're not taking a ton of damage from its Shadow Ball anyway, but completely countering it's pretty funny. But yeah, there's not much more to say about that. Basically the whole premise of the set. You doink on Rotom. Now Specs. I do think Specs is worth mentioning. I'm not a huge fan of it because Jolteon turning it into a really prediction-reliant wall breaker is not my favorite thing to do, but it is still a very, very effective set. And not needing to take a turn Calm Minding to obliterate a potential switch-in, that's pretty cool. And Shadow Ball is actually pretty spammable as well. A lot of the dark types in NU, they're not going to want to switch into a Jolteon anyway. So you could often get free Shadow Balls versus targets like Lurantis, Appleton, etc. that may try to mid-ground, you know, on the T-Bolt. And just risk you Tera Blasting and decide, you know what? There's a 3/4 chance they do not use the move that one-shots me, so hey, let's go for it. When we talk about the speed tier again, because I think it's very, very important to keep reiterating this point, because it's what makes Jolteon so good. 394 speed. What really is coming out after you pick off a KO to revenge kill you? Not a lot. So, you know, unlike something like, say, Toxicroak, which is an incredibly potent wall breaker, or even like Appleton if you want to go even slower, these mods have a pretty wide variety of Pokemon that can come in and revenge kill safely. Jolteon, yeah, you better hope you know its specs. And in the last set, we go back to a Calm Mind variant, because I just want to throw a, you know, one last little shout out to Hyper Offense Jolteon with Flame Orb Quick Feet. You talk about trying to revenge kill this mon. How about, now you can't, because I... Now, again, the annoying thing is Quick Feet's only times 1.5. And, yeah, guess what this number's under? Under 361, so Hisuian Sneasel, if its Scarf does actually revenge kill you. But otherwise, any other Scarf, or like Bruxish, can't anymore. And I'm here to tell you right now, Aqua Jet ain't picking you off from, you know, high HP thresholds. Something like a Rotom now is even more dead to rights, because it can't even threaten you with some chip damage. And then talk about other Scarfers, I mean, let's look down the list here. Something like a Bombardier, that's just slower now, and of course you have Tera Blast. Haunter is just slower and has to get past your Combine boosts anyway. Mesprit just slower, Metacham just slower. I mean, you negate so many of the options for counterplay that, yeah, it can get real dicey real quick for your opponents if they don't have a Scarf Hisuian Sneasel or like one of those, you know, bulky normal types. And since you've got Quick Feet, you can afford Modest. Now those Pokemon are going to be even more careful because the Volt Switch chip is going to do even more. And at +1, your Thunderbolts are hitting different thresholds. You got a little, you know, 10 extra % damage. So, this mon is even more intimidating late game if that was even possible. That's going to be it for this Jolteon showcase. I think this mon is probably the third best mon in the tier. I would say Sandaconda and Scyther are the top 2. And then you've got Jolteon, though, I believe, ticking in at number 3. I mean, this guy deserves a ton of respect in every game. Just through its speed alone, it dictates so much. And then, of course, that... Oh, those horrible 50-50s on Tera. Oh, God. And it's like, Jolteon's not even a mod where once you Tera, you're all of a sudden worthless. Being an Ice type has a lot of benefits for, again, this mod specifically. It's not just a defensive tool. I mean, you talk about a lot of the Pokemon that are tasked with trying to check it. They just can't anymore. And teams will often, you know, they'll have 2. They'll have maybe like a Rotom and a Sandaconda and a Grass type. That's 3, but you get the idea. They'll have at least 2. So, I hope y'all enjoyed this. Use Jolteon if you're not already using it. And yeah, I'll see y'all next time. Peace.